talking about destroying strongholds, and we spent really 2 weeks on it, full weeks, about our war is a spiritual warfare, and the weapons are mighty, divinely powerful for destroying strongholds. And we define those strongholds, at least in this context, it's those lies and those the places, the beliefs that people will build up to keep themselves safe and from having to deal with the truth. And Satan is always trying to captivate us through philosophies, the traditions of men. And so we leave off in this verse here, where in verse 5, he actually said, we're ready to take captive all thoughts into obedience to Christ. And then he says to punish all disobedience. So two things are going on. Satan, either you take your thoughts captive in obedience to Christ and subject it all to the truth of what is really going on, or else you'll be taken captive. It's one or the other. And so I know the ladies did a class, some of the ladies, my wife meets with it, about capturing strongholds or destroying strongholds. And that's why I gave you this sheet. And if you didn't get them, there's a few still left up here. But it's a practical exercise for all of us that, for example, you take this one lie that Satan wants you to have, and that's perhaps, well, you're not forgivable. You're not good enough. Do Christians wrestle with that from time to time? Especially when they're struggling with a sin, or they did something maybe that in their mind was major. And they said, God will never forgive me. I just don't think I'm going to go to heaven. And so Satan wants you to think that because it'll cause you to doubt and hopefully just quit, right? And so what do you have to do? What does Paul say? You have to capture that thought in obedience to Christ. You got to capture, realize this is a negative thought. It's not true. And then you're going to have to find the truth in God's word and replace that negative thought with a truth thought. So you find a text in the Bible. Now, are there many on forgiveness? I might suggest go to Jeremiah 31 through 34. He said, well, Old Testament? Well, yeah, because he says, I'm going to establish a new covenant, not like the old covenant, which they broke, which was written on stone, but this will be written on their hearts. And he goes on to say, and they'll no longer teach their brother to know God, because he says, for they all will know me, and here's why, because I will forgive their sins and remember them no more. And if you just concentrate on that verse and meditate on it, when God says in our covenant relation with him that I'm going to forgive you and I don't remember them, it's as if they never happened. Now, if you start thinking about that, can you take captive then the thought that I'm not good enough, God will never forgive me? Because to hold on to your thought, you have to call God a liar, don't you? You have to say, God, well, that might be true for everyone else, but not for me. No, well, we wouldn't do that. And it's his promise. I'll remember them no more. So then why do I remember them? Well, I choose to, and sometimes they just come up. And so, but see what I'm saying? You take the thought captive, subject it to the truth of God, and then the big part is you can pray that text. You can pray it as your prayer to God. Say, God, help me trust you that you have forgiven me of my sins and you will remember them no more. And help me to forget them. And help me to taste of your forgiveness. And you could pray that as a prayer and a scripture as a prayer. And then that's how you can destroy these things in your life. Now, it can go with pride. It can do with anger. Is there a lot of text on pride and humility? In 1 Peter chapter 5, God is opposed to the proud. But what does he do to the humble? He says he exalts them. Can you make that a prayer? Say, God, I know you're opposed to the pride in my life. And I know that you'll humble or exalt me if I humble myself. So please help me become humble before you and before my fellow man. Could you pray that prayer? You know, take the Bible and what God has promised and spoken and pray it as part of who you are. And take these thoughts captive. Now, why would he go here and say, we're ready to punish all disobedience? Because some false teachers have infiltrated the church at Corinth. And we're not going to go ahead and rehearse all that's going on, but there's just been problems with this church. And these teachers have been claiming that Paul really isn't a legitimate apostle. And we're going to go into a section now where Paul, embarrassingly so, is going to have to defend his apostleship. He has to defend it not to the ones that are accusing him, but he's defending it to the people that are listening to him. Because often you'll never change their mind, right? Because they have an agenda. So you're trying to keep your relationship right with those that are listening or subjected to these lies. So that's where he says, I'm ready to punish, so let's watch out. Wait till I get there. And so when we talk about dealing with false teachers, Paul has already talked about this when he was at the church at Ephesus. He says, I know after my departure, savage wolves will come in. And they're not going to spare the flock. That means they're just going to destroy the church because they really don't care. And he said, even from among your own selves, and who was he talking to when he said this? The elders of the church. So even elders, they're supposed to be the spiritual shepherds. He said, there's going to be men that arise speaking perverse things with one intention, to draw away disciples after them. Egomaniacs. It's all about self. And it's not about the Lord, and it's not about the individual. But they'll talk a good talk. And Paul says that's what's going to happen, so be on the alert. Now, it happens. And that's what's happening we find in Corinth as well. They've described these false teachers as selfish, self-willed, self-centered. Notice it's all about what? Self-promoting, self-commending, self-aggrandizing. They're always talking about how great they are. Now, notice Paul and how he speaks of himself. And so you can get an understanding of how hard this is going to be for him to defend himself. In chapter 11, he said, I just feel foolish, but if I have to play this game, I will. Well, why would Paul feel so reluctant to have to defend himself? Well, notice he says in chapter 4, we have this beautiful treasure, the gospel, in earthen vessels. Some would say that these clay pots are what you'd put refuse or garbage in. Now, when you compare who God is in the gospel and we're these earthen vessels, does that metaphor kind of stick? We're like garbage pots, And he says, I was formerly a blasphemer, a persecutor, an ignorant, and a violent aggressor. And he said, I was a chief of the sinners. And he talks about himself as a wretched man. He goes on to say, I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle. I'm the least of all of them. Now, why did Paul have this state of mind? Because all these things were true. Did he not try to destroy the church? Was he ignorant? And, was he a blasphemer? Yes, all these. So when he says, I'm the chief of sinners, he's not just trying to be rhetorical or dramatic. He meant it. He meant it. And so he's got reason to be humble, and here are these people now attacking him. Yes?
I can't imagine. I would dare say that probably none of us in here have ever killed anybody. Paul was guilty of murder.
Yes.
And not just anybody.
Yeah. Murder. I know, and he bore that shame, and if people had to deal with forgiveness, it was Paul. And he said, God was merciful to me as an example, because if he could forgive me, he can forgive anyone. It's a great verse to look at, Romans 1, 15 and 16, all right? So there's Paul, and so Paul's now going to have to look and defend himself against his accusers. So let's read some of the verses, then we'll talk about it. And we'll try to make application to ourselves. Yes, Clinton.
King David was another man that
Yeah.
self-fear, but God said he's a man after his own heart.
Exactly.
When he messed up, he repent.
That's right. And that's what's so great about our God. He's a God of second chances for all of us. So verse 7, 2 Corinthians 10, verse 7. You are looking things as they are outwardly. If anyone's confident in himself that he is Christ, let him consider this again within himself. Just as he is Christ, so also are we. He's talking about relationship and who they belong to. For even if I should boast somewhat further about our authority, now he's claiming he has authority, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, what do you think he's drawing attention to? What do false teachers do? They divide and destroy and devour. That's what Paul warned. But a true apostle, what are they going to do with their authority? Build up the others, not themselves. All right? For thus I shall not be put to shame. Verse 9, for I do not wish to seem if I would terrify you with my letters. For they say, his letters are weighty and strong, but his personal presence is unimpressive, and his speech contemptible. All right? So let us, the person, consider this. Such a person consider this. That what we are in word by letters when absent, such persons we are indeed when present. And so he says, we'll stop right there. So let's look at some of the things he has to say. All right, the first thing he says, you're looking at things outwardly, and the word in the Greek is you're looking to the face. And so really they're dealing with things very superficially. Is that a problem in our society? We judge people outwardly, and we do. It's just a natural thing. For example, when you see a beautiful buck with a big rack, and you don't see it very often, do you just stop the car and look at it? And on a street by our house, it's off Brush College, you go down it and there's, ee! That's not the right sound. Sorry. Can't even make it, sorry. It's a high shrilled pitch, and I didn't know what it was. It's a peacock. It's a pet peacock. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. All right, and so it's out on the road, and you have to stop every now and then. It'll fan its letters, and you just, whoa, got to take a picture. They're beautiful. Are we attracted to beauty, outward things? Does that happen with people too? Are you attracted to handsome or beautiful-looking people? Yes, we are. And we're impressed with speech and intellect and all that. But Paul's saying it's all superficial. It's just looking at the face. Now, what does God take into consideration? And that's hard because it's hard to see the heart unless you have a relationship, because you will know them by the fruits over time. But he says, you're just being so superficial because you're looking at things outwardly. All right, and that's the problem. In 2 Corinthians 11, he'll go on to say, they disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. And in that text, when we get there, he says, Satan does this as an angel of light. So his servants, don't be surprised, they're working for who? Satan. They disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. And if you are just looking to the outward, you're going to be led astray. Because they'll say the right things. They'll dress the right way. They'll superficially act the right way. Sometimes they'll have the most beautiful prayers, like, I've never met a man so spiritually minded like that. And you're going to feel inferior often in their presence. They like that because that's the way they can intimidate and manipulate. But it's all what? Surface. Surface. And often when you challenge a person like this, the facade crashes and they get angry because they're not used to being challenged and they don't know how to deal with it. But that's one of their tactics, just to come unglued all over you so you go, whoop, I'll never do that again. And they can have control. Yes?
Reminiscent of how Jesus condemned the Pharisees. They were very superficial, dressed the part, talked the part.
Yeah.
But their hearts were far away.
Says you clean the outside the cup, but the inside is just filthy, and exactly, it's all on the outside. So Paul says, you're saying that, I'm kind of contemptible, and you got this great relationship with Christ, but just as, I want you to consider this, that just as he is Christ, so also are we. Can Paul claim that he belonged to Christ? Who else was called by Jesus and got to see him on the Damascus way? I mean, think about that. And I've thought about it. Lord, how come I can't see you like that? Wouldn't that be a privilege and boost your faith and your confidence? To see Jesus, the point that he was blinded by it for 3 days and someone had to restore his sight? To hear a voice from heaven? Now, Peter said we heard the voice of God at the Mount Transfiguration, but to hear Christ talk to you, what would that sound like? It wouldn't be just like an eloquent voice speaking. It'd probably be so awe-inspiring, I can't imagine. Can you? So Paul, was he Christ? Did he belong to Christ? Absolutely. I don't know if sometimes we feel like we belong to him. We're part of him. And that's something we have to realize and think about. That, and it's based on what God does for us and not our own worthiness. So he says, if I have to boast somewhat further about my authority, well, I will. Did Paul have authority? Every letter except one, he begins, I'm talking about the Corinthian letter, the Galatian letter, the Ephesian letter. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. Now, when you look at that, apostle means one sent forth by, who is he sent forth by? An apostle of Jesus Christ. The king sent him out. And who authorized all this? By the will of God. Why does he start every letter that way but one? Because he always had his detractors and people are challenging his authority. Now, can I speak with my own authority like Paul did as a spokesman for Christ? No. No, the only authority I have is to speak what he spoke or what Christ spoke through him, right? As an ambassador. Now, that is authoritative, but I have no authority. Paul did. What was the only letter he did not begin that way? That's your trivia question? The letter to, not Philemon, a Philippian letter, because they had no problems. Now, you're going to check me on that now. Very good. You should check me. All right? So, it's interesting. Authority and the instruction and the teaching is for building of that up. The word there, building up, is the word we get house from, but it's to build a house. And spiritually, that's what his whole passion is to build Christians up into the fullness of Christ. Now, it's interesting, when he says not for destroying, who do you think he's taking a shot at?
What the false teachers are saying that he's doing.
But what do false teachers generally do? They destroy. I mean, how many of you have had a history where you've been part of a congregation and divided? And it divided usually not over a doctrinal thing, but personal things. And usually can point to an element or a person, a spirit, that was present that kind of meticulously behind the scenes brought it all about. And it didn't have to be. And so it's interesting, false teachers destroy. That's what they do. Very rarely do you ever see them starting churches. You know, you don't see that. They infiltrate churches that already exist and then they wreck them. And it's what happens over and over and over. Now, they'll divide, but they're not starting a new one. They're just splitting the one that's there. And Paul, that's what he's up against, and that's what happened in his day. That's what happens even to this day, all right? So he says, you guys are just looking outwardly. I don't wish to seem as if I would terrify you by my letters, because what's the accusation? Oh, his letters are really strong. When he gets here, he's just kind of a, weak little mouse. All right? Now, there's some truth to that. Not really, but we'll have to explain it. He said, I don't wish to seem as if I would terrify you by my letters. Now, what's he acknowledging when he says that?
He uses strong language in his letters.
Yeah, I've been harsh with you. He said, you better straighten up. That was the 1 Corinthian letter. And there's another letter we don't have, which was probably the worst. But he says, wait till I get there. But he dealt with problem after problem, and he was strong. And they're saying, yeah, he's strong when he's not here. But when he gets here, he's just kind of meek and mild and wishy-washy. And he just proves he's really not truly an apostle. He's just trying to frighten you from afar. So Paul says, first of all, this word terrify means to frighten someone out of its wits. That's how it's used literally. So in his words, it was really unsettling when he spoke to them. when he told the congregation in 1 Corinthians 5, the one that was living in immorality, I've decided to deliver such a one over to Satan. Did you hear that? Paul says, I'm delivering him to Satan for the destruction of his flesh, so his soul might be saved. Now, I wasn't here when we talked about that verse, but do you know what that verse means? When you're delivered over to Satan for the destruction of your flesh? Well, you need to go back and look at it, but that's frightening. And Paul says, I didn't mean it just to frighten you, but this is serious stuff. You know, I wasn't just trying to scare you, but I care about you enough to say these hard things. All right? Yes.
It seems to me that the false teachers, unlike Paul, are not understanding how Jesus used authority and how he would have us to use authority. Yes, there were strong words, but there's also, Jesus was very, as you said, second chance and
Right.
meet with those who were repentant.
It's always the spirit in which you're saying it. And sometimes we're gentle in our words, and sometimes we have to be stronger. But it's the spirit. What is the spirit?
The then disciples went to the towns and they wanted to call down the fire and rain, and he says, you don't know what kind of
Spirit you're of, right. Exactly. And so if you're always, your heart is right, the words will come out right, even if they're strong. If you're caring and loving, you're trying to save them or build them up. Because it's, what is the proverb said? You know, better the rebuke of a brother than the flattery from the lips of a fool. That's Jack's paraphrase. But what is he saying? Some people will just flatter you, but a brother will rebuke you when you need to. And that's the best thing you need. That's the best thing you can have. All right? Yes. All right, so it's interesting about this part. His letters are weighty and strong, but his personal presence is unimpressive. There's some truth to that. Now, when we look at Paul's life and the little clues, he might have had an eye problem because he said, see with what large letters I write. He had some thorn in the flesh, which we'll read about later. But one writer, and this is documented well, from that day, saying he was a man of small stature with a bald head and crooked legs, in a good state of body with eyebrows meeting, that means they ran together, and somewhat of a hooked nose. And so I've seen people that drew a picture that kind of matches this, and he's not a very impressive looking person. And so when they're saying, yes, if you've seen Paul, you know what I'm saying. He's not much to look at. And it was probably true. All right? Yes.
Well, on top of that, he's been beat up.
Good point.
You don't go through what Paul had gone through and emerge from that unscathed. He probably had scars, and who knows? Maybe his limbs had been broken so that he couldn't walk without this awful-looking gait. Maybe he dragged a foot. I don't know.
Yes. Now, he'll go through the list of all those things in the next chapter. And he's wearing the brands or the marks and the scars of Jesus Christ, is what he says. And that's why he's so beat up. Yes.
And if you look at his letters, you have to remember, Paul is one of the most educated people of his day.
Yes.
And most scholars who read the language of his letters say that they're beautifully constructed, and there are all these subordinate clauses and things that you have to carefully follow because it was this wonderful construction. And no doubt when he was with people, he didn't speak the same way he wrote.
Yeah. Is that a gift to write like that? Some people, yeah. And then it doesn't always follow through. They can speak that way. But he was taught by Gamaliel, one of the most prestigious rabbis of his day. Yes.
He even said, how many times he did shipwreck and fight with
Yes.
beasts and all sorts of things.
Exactly. That's right.
That beast would have torn him up, and then by the grace of God, he didn't get away.
That's right. So I'm just saying this because I don't know what your picture of this man is. Not the 6 foot two guy and good looking, and he just well, they were probably correct, unimpressive. And then when you listen to him talk, oh, it's contemptible. All right. In other words, well, sort of like me. Don't know grammar, can't pronounce words right. But that's okay, because the power's where? It's in what God says, not what the person says. Yes?
He makes another mention of that in 1 Corinthians 2:1. He says he did not come to them with excellence
A speech, yes.
He was not an Apollos.
He acknowledges that, right? So it's easy for your detractors to grab on to what is obvious and use that as their ammunition to discredit you in your apostleship. But is there any relationship between the two? Your looks and your speech. That's all what? Outward. It's all outward. But people are attracted to the other, and that's the problem. And so have you ever seen, I know Kevin has to run into this, and Mariano, and then also, Nathan, don't do that. It was right there. Sorry, Nathan. Because they drive UPS and FedEx, right? And don't you just love those beep, 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 beep? And some of them aren't as cute as this one, because he's not even cute. Some of them look like drowned rats, you know, the little puppy. All right, I'm sorry if you have one. They're not dogs. All right, sorry, I'm getting in trouble. And they never stop, you know, and I was parked at a store, and they had two of them in their SUV, and they were both at the window. When you walk by, they're just snarling and just, you know what I'm talking about, right? Why did I even bring this up? That's what they're saying Paul's like in his letters. Oh, he's strong and snapping, but, you know, it's just all bark and no bite, right? And that's what those little puppies are, those little dogs are like, often. It's just, and if you look at them, poof, and they run, right? That's what they're saying. Paul's a fraud. He's a fake. And so we look at the next verse. Oh, look at it. All right. Let such a person consider this, that we are what we are in word by letters, that's who we are, we're indeed when we're present. Now, don't you like that? So I put up this guy, and not just because you guys used to raise him and still have one, but aren't golden retrievers one of the most affectionate, nice, kind dogs? And are they all as consistent, you know, and just loving and your best friend? That's why they're one of the most popular breeds in America to this day, right? What, will they defend and snarl and bite when they mean it? Yeah, they'll be very protective when they have to because they're loving and they're caring. So don't think of Paul as one of those little snotty dogs. Think of him, if you want to, as a golden retriever, all right? He's loving, he's caring, he's kind. But when he needs to be, he can speak strongly. But he's the same person when he's there in person. Because he doesn't want to come with strong words. He said, I want you to take care of it so when we come, we can have joy and peace. Isn't that what you want? Take care of it before I get there so we can enjoy each other's fellowship. And that's what he's saying. But you just have to understand, who is the person that wrote those words? It was me. And when I come to you in person, it's still me. And if I need to be, I can be strong. All right? And so that's what he's trying to tell them. There's a consistency here. And let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 4, actually verse 1 through 3. Because Paul's had to deal with this, and I just wanted you to see how it's all tied together. This isn't the first time. So 1 Corinthians 3, verse 1. Brethren, I could not speak to as spiritual men, but as to men of flesh, as to babes. That's strong, right? You're just still babes in Christ. I gave you milk to drink and not solid food. I'm sorry. Chapter 4 is where I wanted, but that's a good verse too. So. All right. That's their problem. They're still fleshly. Chapter 4, he's talking about his stewardship. Verse 1, let a man regard it in this manner, as servants of Christ, as stewards of the mysteries of God. In this case, moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. or trustworthy. Verse 3, to me, it's a very small thing. Really, I could care less what you say about me. Now, he says a small thing, but we would say, no, I could care less that I should be examined by you. Did you hear that? And they're constantly trying to, tear him apart or judge him. He said, I could care less. Now, why would he care less? Is he being, self-grandized? Is he being egocentric here? I don't care what you think. No, he goes on to say, he says, I don't care if I'm examined by you or any human court. In fact, I don't even examine myself. Whoa. Paul, you mean you're just this lone ranger? Just do whatever you want? No. Verse 4, I'm conscious of nothing against myself, yet I am not by this acquitted, but the one who examines me is the Lord. See, the only one that matters is what Jesus thinks of you. See that? And so when we look at ourselves as Christians, sometimes we play to other people's opinion. It's easy to do that. It's really hard for a preacher not to do that because we love compliments, right? Because we're looking for feedback, and you don't like negative feedback. Isn't that just natural? You love positive feedback. So can you imagine it's easy to get into a rut or just a trend of saying the things you know that people like to hear because of the feedback you've gotten? Now, there's a point that it's okay, but is that unhealthy long term? Yeah, because you're just tickling ears then. And so my wife's the only one that really tells me exactly how my lessons are, right? Because she loves me. And she wants me to be better. And I mean that. I wouldn't be who I am without her. But she's learned over the years that when I'm going home, she doesn't tell me what's wrong with my lesson the first thing. Because you're very vulnerable after you've done that. She says, she picks out the good points. And she says, yeah, it was good. And it was good to see so-and-so there. But that was good for someone to hear. But then later, after she's built me up, she says, yeah, when you said that, you could, and she'll talk about the things that I could have done better or shouldn't have done. And then I'm receptive to it. All right? And so I'll let my wife examine me. But really when it comes down to who's the only one that really matters? What does Jesus think about what I'm doing? And see, if we're serving him, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. So I just have to ask us that when we're looking about our own self, we're not apostles, but we are ambassadors for Christ. We are his disciples. Is pleasing Jesus and serving him the most important thing in my life? If it's not, I'm going to get off the right path. I'm going to be listening to other voices rather than his. And so it's easy to say, oh yeah, he's the most important. Oh, is he? Is he the one I think about every day that how am I going to please him? Is my number one goal is to be in heaven with him more than any other thing? Because if it really is, it's going to all of a sudden define that walk ahead of us. And again, all these voices are trying to pull us to one side or the other. Yes?
A little bit of the same feeling as a teacher. I get, we hear students complain all the time, oh, he's horrible at this or bad at that, or good at this, or you can tell when they're trying to butter you up or
Right.
or something. But it doesn't matter to me what my students think of me so much. It matters what my employer and the person who gave me the job and sent me to do that job, am I doing
Right.
what they need me to do? Because,
Right.
I
Yeah,
have students that are good and like me, great, but that's not what I'm there to do.
That's right. Okay. How did that happen? The way to discern false prophets, though, in the contrast, is by their words and their works. Because Paul says there's a consistency here. What I say is what you're going to see me do. And what I do is always backed up by what I say. There's congruency between what comes out of the mouth and by looking at their actions. Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits. And that's how you know false teachers, he said. You'll know them by their fruits. And so that's how you can tell when a person's genuine spiritually and someone you want to follow and listen to. You look at their words and then you look at their works. And they better match up, right? And if they don't, then there's your warning. So we're told to be fruit inspectors, okay? But Paul says, examine me if you want, because what I do is what I say, and what I say is what I do, and you're not going to find any hypocrisy in me, not like these people that are accusing me. Yes?
And the funnier part that I catch on this is when I'm writing with Paul, I'm writing with strong worded letter because you're doing something wrong.
Yes?
Ideally, when you know I'm coming into town, you'll have fixed those things. And I have no reason
Yeah.
to be terrifying or harsh with you.
Yes.
Be able to be there and be nice and enjoy my time with you because you fixed these problems that I pointed out.
And so since it all turned out, you're accusing me of just what you're saying. You know, that's a problem, that I'm coming with joy? Yeah. Yeah, they're turning a good thing into a bad thing, aren't they? So, yes.
You know, I think you set the stage like this. Paul is not trying to be confrontational. A lot of times we try to be confrontational.
Yes.
You want to place that on a solution-focused mind, so it's being confrontational, so instead of being confrontational. So you're trying to focus on the solution together, shoulder to shoulder, in order to come up with a fix.
That's a good point.
It doesn't come in trying to beat people down. So, as an example, we have a company survey done. Well, if the company survey comes back that's done anonymously, how are you treated by management? How do you feel like the culture is? If it comes back negative, guess who's going to be talked to? The owner, the management. So the people, the group of people that you're leading, or that you're trying to influence, you do want them to come back.
You need feedback, don't you?
Positive way. You're not there to be men pleasers, but you're also not wanting to.
Exactly.
And everybody hates this person, or it doesn't matter. It only matters to who those are above you. It does matter to who is next to you, shoulder to shoulder with you.
Yes.
And so that's what Paul's trying to do here, is he's coming in and trying to give a solution and placing it in the right spot. I heard a phrase once where Christ would say, he walks softly, talks softly, but also carried a big stick when needed, right?
Right.
And that's what Paul has to do sometimes. And we have to do the same thing with one another, but how we do it, how we come across.
Exactly. There was a time where people thought they were being spiritual and by just telling everyone what they were doing wrong, and just like decimate a church and just lay out all their problems and walk away. Well, I told them. What does that accomplish? But Paul said, I use my authority for what? Building up, not tearing down. Now, I understand sometimes to build up, you have to correct what's wrong, build a better foundation. But you talk about teaching, yeah, you don't care what your students, but you do care what the assessments are. Because if they're all flunking math, that is a direct reflection on you, right? Huh?
Nehemiah is a great example. His walls couldn't get built. He comes along, goes in, 50, 60 days, because he got
That's right.
involved. He was concerned about what else was around him, so that his vibe, the culture around him was positive, and who he was trying
That's
to
right.
be by getting next to him.
And we're going to see that. Paul was forward thinking. He's looking at the solution and not looking backward. That's coming up in just a second. Yes.
We are called to be overcomers.
Yes, overcomers.
In order to do that, in order to overcome anything, we need to know what tools we have to do that with. And as brothers and sisters, it's really helpful if we build our relationship
Yes.
strong enough so we can see each other's strengths.
And to know what tools are, first you got to identify the thing you need to overcome. That's the hard thing. And that's what Paul's been doing. He's accused for being mean for doing it. But he's actually caring. But yes, that's right. Then if it's not good enough just to show people what their problem is, then give them the tools and the solution to deal with it. That's the loving thing.
Remind them what their strength is.
Yes, yes. Heather.
To go back a step, I'm just getting some thoughts that Paul opposed Peter to his face.
Yes.
I always envision that as being kind of intense, like, because he does that publicly, and just the scene plays out, like, because he stood condemned, and it just doesn't sound pretty.
It was confrontational, wasn't it?
Quiet mouse to me, or.
Yeah. And the reason that one was is because it was a public hypocrisy, and Paul had to correct it in front of them so they wouldn't be swayed by his hypocrisy. It was a unique situation. But yeah. Now, the reason I got this is, what are dog shows? What do dogs do when they have a dog show? you have breeds come in, unless it's a mixed breed, and they compare themselves to others. You think. But they're supposed to be comparing themselves to the standard. A good judge knows what the standard for that breed is and the problems with that breed, and they can tell, does that dog most closely represent the perfect ideal standard for that breed? All right? Weight, height, everything, hips, everything. They look at it all, right? But we end up comparing dog to dog. Now, Paul says, he's being sarcastic here. We're not so bold like some of you, or to compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves, and this is interesting, and compare themselves with themselves, they're without understanding. And here is what's really interesting. The false standard, and it was a popular method in the day, that you would compare teachers or orators with other famous ones. And you compare teacher with teacher, the philosophers and all that. And we do that too. We had 4 preachers this weekend. They all had different styles. But I know in your mind, you say, well, I like this guy here because of this feature, and I like this guy because he did this. And we do that. It's natural, all right? But Paul says that's the wrong way to compare a preacher or a teacher. You compare them by what they're saying and the authority in which they're saying it, and not their style. But notice this. They measure others by yourself. Now, what does that mean? When you're looking to build yourself up, yeah, I'm doing a good job, by measuring others by yourself, what kind of group of people are you looking for? Inferior, right, okay? So I'm measuring others by yourself. Look at them. They're not doing man. Yeah, right? Then the second thing they do, they measure self by others. That sometimes they'll look at them, man, look at that guy. Wow, I need to be more like that, more eloquent, and tell more stories or tell more jokes, right? And the third one is the worst. You measure yourself by yourself. Now, the third one, who always wins? You do. You always win. Because when you look at yourself in the mirror, like, what a great guy I am. And Paul says, I have none of that. I could care less what you think about me, because you're without understanding who's the only one that you should measure yourself against. Christ. Jesus Christ. Yes.
Tax collector and a Pharisee.
Yeah. Exactly. They had to deal with that, didn't they?
The point I wanted to make was that, Paul wrote those letters for them to correct and make the changes.
Yes.
So that when he came there, he could build forward.
Yes.
Instead of spend all this time changing and correcting.
Yes. He wanted to grow. Yes.
So, his goal was to, when I get there, I want to add on to what we're doing.
Exactly.
Not rebuild.
Yeah, let's get it done before I get there. Real quickly, and we're out of time. We will not boast beyond our measure, or the measure with our sphere. This word sphere is the word we get canon of the Bible. It's a measured unit, a measure. And when we're talking about the canon of the Bible, that which is accepted be authoritative. Paul's using it here. It's your space, and sometimes he uses it for the lanes you run in, like in the Corinthian games. They're used to running races. And what happens when you get out of your lane? You're disqualified. And so God has given everyone their own gift, and their gifts that differ. That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We see it in Romans chapter 12. He's allotted, that's the same word here that he's using up here. And Paul says, God gave me a job. He gave me gifts, and I ran with those. And he said, I was the first one to Corinth. Do you remember that? And they go, oh, yeah, that's right. So don't tell me that I'm treading on other people's work, and I'm trying to take credit for what other people's doing. But I didn't boast and try to claim credit for what other people are doing, but I've been working as God has given me the charge. I wish we could look at those verses. We're not overextending ourselves. I wish I had time to talk about this, but maybe I will some other day. Preachers want to overextend themselves and save the world. Is that kind of natural? But what they need to do is, first of all, save themselves and save those people in their family and save those in their area. Forget about the world.
I just want to add that the comment earlier, it can't be taken as a broad paint stroke, what I was talking about. That's in that situation, that context. There are lots of other verses that come up that we do have to move quickly. Romans 16, 17, avoid those who are
Yes.
1 Thessalonians 5,
Yes.
16,
You're right.
faint-hearted, unruly, weak. There's all kinds of different situations.
Those are exceptions to the general approach, so you're right.
More in this context.
That's right. But Paul had integrity, and I just wanted you to see that. And then the last thing, he says, I'm hoping your faith grows, so we're going to boast and go into other areas outside of you. So this is where Paul is pressing forward. He's forward thinking. He's always reaching forward. And this is what you were alluding to. He said, that's why I'm trying to fix things in the church where you are, because I want your faith to grow. Our sphere will be large. In other words, the lane we run in, it'll get bigger and bigger, and we'll get the chance to preach even to other regions beyond you, because you're a conduit to get to the next area. And I see how future-minded he is thinking and looking forward and not looking behind. That's what he says in Philippians, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward. That's what he says. That's why he spoke strongly to you, because we want to just keep growing and get our lane bigger and bigger that we're running in. And I'm not going to boast of what other people have accomplished. So here's what we've done. If you're going to boast, what should you do? Boast in the Lord. He quotes Jeremiah chapter 9 and verse 24. You need to read that. It said, let not a wise man boast in his wisdom, or a rich man boast in his wealth. But let him who boasts, boast in this, that he knows me. I'm a God of what? Compassion, or that's loving kindness. And he says, I forgot. But now when I'm supposed to say it to close class, I forgot it. Chapter 9. Thus saith the Lord, let not a wise man boast of his wisdom, not let the mighty man boast of his might, not let a rich man boast of his riches. See, those are all superficial. But let him who boasts, boast of this, that he understands that I am the Lord, who exercises loving kindness, justice, and righteousness on the earth, and I delight in these things, declares the Lord. You know, if you're going to boast, you boast in your relationship with God and what God is able to do through you, and that he loves you, and his loving kindness he did for you. You don't deserve it. You're right. You're nothing without him. That's what Paul's saying. I'm nothing. But God has made me something. So when I boast in him. And if I do some things for the Lord, all glory to him. And that's how he ends this chapter. It's a beautiful way to end it. All right. Sorry we had to rush you through the end.